Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the IRCC webinar, where we will be discussing latest changes to travel restrictions, exemptions, and online processing with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. As housekeeping announcements, I would just like to mention that the webinar today will start with a presentation where we will be sharing important information, and that will be followed by a few questions and answers. Now, these questions have been collected based on the social media queries that we have been receiving over the past few days, and hence we hope that they will be able to address most of the queries that we have been receiving through you in the chat box. Just to make this clear that this webinar is not just for students, but it will cover all lines of business. So we will be talking about all kinds of travelers, whether they are holding a temporary resident visa as a visitor to Canada, as a worker to Canada, and of course as a student to Canada. And it also includes visitors who are traveling for the purpose of family reunification or traveling for any compassionate purposes. So without any further ado, I would like to start the webinar. My name is Anindita Buragohai, and I am the Outreach Officer for IRCC in India. Once again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today, where we will be sharing with you latest updates on travel restrictions, exemptions, and changes in VAC operations. Please note that the contents of this webinar are valid as of today. For the most current information on IRCC processes and travel restrictions to Canada, please visit www.canada.ca/immigration. The link to all our social media coordinates will be shared with you at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, let us begin. To protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID-19, the Government of Canada implemented travel restrictions that limit travel to Canada. Until further notice, most foreign nationals cannot travel to Canada, even if they have a valid visitor visa or electronic travel authorization. These restrictions stop non-essential or non-discretionary travel to Canada. The program today will review what IRCC considers to be essential travel, and therefore these travelers may be exempt from the travel restrictions. This slide is a very brief overview of the current exemptions and what is exempt as of today. We strongly encourage you to receive a full explanation of all of our travel exemptions by going to our website. We even have a helpful robot named Quaid that can assist you in getting to the correct spot by typing in your questions. Please remember that the airline you use to travel to Canada and port of entry office always have the last say in whether you will be allowed to board or enter Canada. We can only provide you with guidance based on the information that you provide to Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, more commonly known as IRCC. On this slide, you will see a comparative list of the requirements and exemptions you will need to keep in mind based on which category of traveler you fit into. For those who require an authorization letter, you must email the mailbox listed at the bottom of this page or of the slide. You must provide information regarding if your visa is in process or if you already have a visa. You will only need the authorization letter. These letters can only be provided by our unit in Canada, not the mission here not any of the missions here in India. It is important to know who is considered an immediate family member. According to these travel restrictions, immediate family members include your spouse or common law partner, your child who is under the age of 22, your parent or step-parent if over the age of 22, they are considered an extended family member, your guardian or your tutor, your spouse's dependent child, your spouse's parent or step-parent, a dependent child of your dependent child. Status of family member in Canada is very important, and documentation regarding the status of your family member in Canada should be provided to the airline and port of entry when entering Canada. Documents such as birth certificate or the last page of an Indian passport showing parentage, along with family in Canada status document like a permanent resident card or citizenship certificate or a Canadian passport is important to have available. Canadian citizens and permanent residents. Immediate family members are eligible to travel to Canada. This is considered essential travel, and no authorization letter is required if the travel is over 15 days. If under 15 days, You must be traveling for essential purposes. An authorization letter is required. A temporary resident in Canada whose immediate family members want to travel to Canada are eligible to travel to Canada if travel is essential. In almost all cases, an authorization letter is required. In some cases, like a study permit applicant approved and traveling with their family so that they will reside together in Canada, do not require an authorization letter. Please note that currently we are prioritizing applicants who may be exempt from the travel restrictions. Therefore, if you have applied online and are waiting an answer on your application and you meet the criteria above, you must flag how you meet the criteria by email. The IRCC COVID travel exemption mailbox. Again, the email ID is given on the slide in front of your screen. Please provide all the information required to show that you are exempt, that you are traveling for more than 15 days, that you can provide that you are an immediate family member and the status document for your family members in Canada. As of October 8, 2020, Canadian citizens and permanent residents, extended family members are eligible to travel to Canada. According to these travel restrictions, extended family members include individuals in an exclusive dating relationship with a Canadian citizen or permanent resident for at least 1 year who have spent in the physical presence of the Canadian citizen or permanent resident during the relationship, and these individuals' dependent children. Non-dependent children. Adult children who do not meet the definition of a dependent child in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. Grandchildren. Siblings, including half and step siblings, and grandparents. Foreign nationals will be eligible to travel to Canada and will not need to demonstrate that they are entering for a purpose that is non-optional or non-discretionary, as long as they are staying in the country for 15 days or more. Provide IRCC with the required documentation, including a completed and signed statutory declaration, to show that they meet the definition of an extended family member of a Canadian citizen or Canadian permanent resident, meet the existing eligibility and admissibility requirements to enter the country, and are traveling to Canada with a valid passport and travel document, which could be a visa or an electronic travel authorization if needed. And you also must have received written authorization from IRCC to travel to Canada as an extended family member. For these extended family members seeking to travel to Canada from any country other than the United States, an authorization letter issued by IRCC is required. Moving on to the next slide. Foreign nationals are now eligible to enter Canada for compassionate reasons by providing support to Canadian citizens, permanent residents, temporary resident, or a protected person in the following situations. These reasons include being present during the final moments of life for a loved one, providing support to a person deemed critically ill, providing care to a person who medically requires support, attending a funeral or end-of-life ceremony. Provinces and territories may have additional requirements and processes that must be respected. Quarantine plans can be adjusted. An online form to be completed and sent to the Public Health Agency of Canada. Once you have the online form, you can write to IRCC COVID exemption mailbox with the form and advise that you either have a visa or require a visa. Depending on the situation, you may be biometric exempt or travel on a foil-less visa, meaning that they will accommodate you traveling without having the actual visa in your passport. For workers, the key factor is that the worker either lived in Canada before the pandemic and needs to return and have a valid visa. Evidence that they lived in Canada would be duration of their work permit and stamps in their passport showing that they had entered Canada in the past. The other key component is if a worker has a valid visa and has a job offer and is able to work after they quarantine in Canada. Before they make any travel arrangements, if the foreign national has submitted a work permit application and has received a letter of introduction, the foreign national should confirm with their prospective employer that the work location or organization is not subject to mandatory closure of non-essential businesses. If the business is closed, workers should not proceed to Canada at this time. If the business is open, they will be able to start their employment after the 14-day quarantine period. Travelers need to show airline staff that you're exempt from the travel restrictions. To do this, show the following documents to airline personnel when you're boarding your flight. Passport or travel document, proof that you're exempt from travel restrictions, such as emergency service providers, a letter of invitation from a relevant organization in Canada, government or non-government organization, Healthcare students, a letter of invitation from a relevant teaching institution. Marine crew joining vessels, a joining letter from shipping agents. After sales service, not including installation. After sales service contracts. Family members of workers. Foreign nationals who are accompanying family members of work permit holders where the spouse has a letter of introduction for an open work permit or meet another exemption from travel restrictions. The decision of the border services will be context specific. In a situation where immediate family members are ordinarily residents of Canada, a border services officer may allow entry as travel would not be optional. In a situation where the temporary worker is coming to do work that is critical for the Canadian economy, border service officers may examine the motivations for travel for any of the dependents at this time, particularly as schools are not open. Learning institutions whose COVID-19 readiness plans have been approved by their provincial or territorial government will soon be able to welcome more international students back to their schools. Amended travel restrictions have taken effect on October 20th, 2020, allowing international students to enter Canada if their designated learning institution or DLI has an approved COVID-19 readiness plan in place. With primary responsibility for education and healthcare, provincial and territorial governments assess COVID-19 readiness plans that schools are putting in place. As part of their plans, DLIs are expected to provide specifics to their provincial or territorial government on how they will provide information to international students on health and travel requirements before they arrive in Canada, how they will help students with their quarantine plans and provide guidance or assistance in acquiring the necessities of life, such as food and medication, during their quarantine. Readiness plans also need to establish protocols for the health of students in the event where there are suspected or confirmed COVID-19 cases at the school. The Government of Canada works closely with provinces and territories on the attraction and hosting of international students in Canada and other issues related to international education. Provincial and territorial partners indicated that they would like to see a process that allows international students to begin traveling to Canada again, as long as it is done safely and respects health requirements. Taking a cautious approach, the federal, provincial, and territorial governments have worked together in developing that process. The list of DLIs with an approved COVID-19 readiness plan in place has been posted on IRCC's webpage for international students affected by COVID-19 restrictions and is updated regularly as provinces and territories identify additional schools. This change to travel restrictions affects all international students regardless of where they are traveling from or when their study permit was approved. Travelers should not make any travel plans until they have met all requirements and received all necessary authorizations. All permanent residents with a valid permanent resident card may enter Canada. What we are talking about is a PR who do not have a card and will need a PRTD or a permanent resident travel document. You must email the IRCC COVID PRTD mailbox, and you can see that email address on the slide in front of your screen. And you have to mail with your PRTD application forms an online fee payment receipt. A file will be created for you based on your email submission. If your application is approved, you will receive a request to submit your passport for a PRTD counterfoil to be inserted. Next, we move on to confirmation of permanent resident card holders. What if your COPR has not expired? In this case, you are exempt from the current travel restrictions and can come to Canada if you have a valid COPR and the COPR was issued on or before March 18th, 2020, or the COPR was issued after March 18th, 2020 and you are an immediate family member sponsored by a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Note that grandparents are not considered immediate family members and cannot come to Canada at this time. In case you have an expired COPR, you can only travel to Canada if you are willing to settle now, not land in Canada, and can provide evidence that you plan to settle down. We know many of you have submitted the web form and your authorizations are being provided and centralized in Canada, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, and not at any of the missions in India. We appreciate your patience as we work through the large volume of expired COPR holders. At this time, family class applicants are being prioritized. Let's look at what processing changes have been introduced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Until 31st January 2021, we will only be accepting applications online. This means you can apply for any type of visa online, whether it is a student, a worker, or a visitor visa. However, priority will be given to those applicants who meet the travel restrictions. We are unable to provide specific processing timelines and cannot offer a response to any questions on the turnaround for processing of applications at this time. We will contact applicants once there is an update regarding their application. We encourage applicants to continue to watch our website for updates as well as follow us on social media. On the IRCC website, we normally publish processing times for each of our missions for all of our lines of business. Note that these processing times are no longer accurate, as there are processing delays due to reduced staff at the mission. And again, we are prioritizing applicants that meet the travel exemptions. As you are likely aware, we have started a phased approach to providing services at the VAC. After being closed for an extended period of time due to the pandemic, a lot has changed, and we take the health and welfare of our clients and staff very seriously. Therefore, we ask that you please be cautious and not crowd outside the VACs and come to your biometric appointments alone. VFS is now accepting appointments for biometrics for students. Many students require biometric appointments, and we are asking for your patience as biometric appointments are being rolled out incrementally. At this time, only students and family class permanent resident applicants will be prioritized for biometric appointments. Therefore, family members of students may have to wait. Visit the VFS website and follow us on social media for updates to VAC priorities. We understand that there is a huge demand for biometric appointments. Currently, we are prioritizing family members being sponsored to Canada as well as student applications. The VAC has already booked over 40,000 biometric appointments. We were unable to provide priority for those who have enrolled in classes in January session and from an approved DLI. Given the volume of emails and requests received, it was impossible for the VAC to further triage appointments based on enrollment dates. Our priority was to get as many people their appointments as possible. This may mean that not all students will receive their study permit for the January session. Please note that you may study online and DLIs are still offering classes online. Once you obtain your study permit, and if you are from a DLI with an approved COVID readiness plan, you may travel to Canada. If your DLI is not on the approved provinces and territories list, we will only finalize applications which result in a refusal. If you meet eligibility requirements, your application will not be approved for a visa until travel restrictions are further amended or lifted. We want to inform you of various fraud activities and misinformation related to immigration applications. We strongly advise you to scan the QR code on the screen for more information. Protect yourself. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Never share your personal information with unauthorized strangers. Fraudulent websites and scams. Websites may claim to be official Government of Canada sites. They do this to trick people into paying them money. Email scams. IRCC will never send you an email from a private address. The latest issue is emails that appear to be coming from our office but are actually coming from a scammer. Learn how to expand the headings of the email address you receive to find out who the email is actually coming from. Telephone scams. IRCC will never ask you for any sort of payment by telephone. All fees must be paid online through our website. Unauthorized agents. You do not have to use a consultant to submit an application. If you choose to use one, ensure that your representative is legally authorized to represent you at canada.ca/immigration-representative. Examples of authorized agents include members of law societies in Canada, members of the Chambre des Notaires in Quebec, and members of ICCRC, a regulatory body for immigration consultants in Canada. An authorized representative can provide you with valuable tips to avoid paying too much money for an immigration service, as well as what you can expect. Any paid representative must be authorized. When you use an authorized representative and if they provide you with incorrect information, you have recourse for it to be investigated through the ICCRC. If you use an unauthorized representative and they defraud you, you have no recourse. Unpaid representatives could be family members and or a trusted friend. These must be declared on your application form. Requirements for entering Canada by air. As of November 21st, 2020, if you're flying to Canada and as your final destination, you must use the ArriveCAN app to submit your travel and contact information quarantine plan, unless exempted under conditions set out in the mandatory isolation order. And you must also have a COVID-19 symptom self-assessment test taken. You must use ArriveCAN before you board your flight to Canada. If you're using the ArriveCAN app, your window to submit information opens 90 days before your flight. If you submit your information by signing into ArriveCAN online, your window opens 14 days before your flight. Once you submit your information through ArriveCAN, a receipt will be displayed to be ready to show the receipt to a Canadian Border Services officer. You can show your receipt from the app as a screenshot or a printout. For more information, here are the many ways to contact with us and to find information. We have the IRCC website, the High Commission website, and also our social media channels such as Facebook and Twitter. If you need to contact us, please only use the web form. If you are attaching additional information to your application, we will create space in your online application if you send us a request via the web form, and then you will be able to upload the document yourself within 5 business days. You can do this by linking your application. Just search the IRCC secure web link. The other email addresses listed on the slide have been covered in the presentation, but these are just mentioned again for your information, and if you want, you can take a picture of this or a screenshot of this. Please only send a message to the IRCC COVID travel exemption mailbox if you meet the travel exemptions and require an authorization letter or need to request your visa to be processed because you meet the travel exemptions. We would appreciate your feedback on this presentation. Feel free to comment on our Facebook page regarding how we can improve on our communication going forward, as well as what other topics you would like us to cover in our presentations going forward. And with this, we come to the end of the presentation part of our webinar today. We will now, as mentioned at the beginning, be taking up a few very frequently received questions over our different social media channels and on email. And to answer those questions, we have with us Ms. Jackie McLean, who is the manager for our Client Services and Exceptional Cases Unit. So, Jackie, welcome to the webinar. And without any further ado, let me ask you a very frequently asked question, which has been coming in recently. The VAC biometric appointments are not available even after weeks of waiting. So how do our clients know when the next VAC appointments will be made available?
Thank you, Anandita, and I'm hoping, can you just confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Thank you. So what we're doing is we're reevaluating how many people have signed in for their VAC appointments and what our current inventory is of student and family class members. Based on that, we are trying to release appointments and will advise via our social media when more appointments become available. For right now, what we're doing is we're increasing the hours of operation and appointment slots, and we've begun enrolling in the VACs where the appointment are completely full, which is primarily in the north. We've also are going to be opening on Saturdays. Therefore, we know that there is a certain amount of need in certain VACs, whereas other VACs, the appointments are not completely full. So what we will be releasing appointments, and we're looking at strategically doing that perhaps in areas where we can accommodate more appointments. So please stay tuned and look on our social media website to see when more appointments may be released.
Thank you, Jackie. The next question is also pretty much related on this lines, but maybe you can throw some specific light on it because this is also coming in a lot. Given that now students are exempt to travel to Canada, when will VAC appointments be available for their spouses who have applied for open work permits or plan to apply for open work permits?
Again, what we're planning on doing is releasing spots based on priority, and that might differ depending on where it is in India, given that some of our VACs are completely booked up until at least the end of January. We will look at different areas where we can open up more slots. But given that we just recently opened up and extended the hours in certain places, we are looking to see how that will be able to accommodate more of our priority students and family class. So I cannot give you a specific date at this point in time, but please watch our website so that we can provide you with as much information as possible.
Thank you, Jackie. The next question is with regard to COPRs. So the question is, if someone has an expired COPR and they have written to IRCC for their authorization letter and they have still not received it, so by when can they expect to receive their authorization letter?
Once again, we cannot provide an exact time frame. Every case is a little bit different, but I do see the many requests for expired COPRs to be allowed to travel to Canada. And that is being centralized in our office in Canada. And they're pulling lists based on first priority is family class. And then after that, they're looking to make sure that the documents have not expired. So it could be that you may have an expired medical, an expired police certificate, and you won't be able to travel until you have updated that and receive after that an authorization letter. So again, I cannot provide a specific time because every case is different, but I know that they had an enormous, as you can imagine, with the travel restrictions being in place for such a long time in different countries with different periods of lockdown, that there was a significant inventory. So that is still being worked on. I know that there's been a lot of positive results lately with a lot of people receiving their authorization letters. And again, this is only for applicants that can go to Canada and are prepared to settle. I know there's many of them, and I know many of you have booked your accommodations, even purchased houses, have employment, and definitely our office in Canada is looking at all of that to see whether or not you are able to travel to Canada at this time.
Thank you, Jackie. The next question is with regard to the biometric instruction letter. So if someone has a letter which has now expired and has crossed the 30-day limit, are they still able to submit their biometrics now?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. The biometric instruction letter is an automatically generated letter, and it'll have the time frame on it. However, we never planned for this pandemic to happen. So obviously, we know that in many places, such as in Mexico, where the VACs are still closed, India, where they're only open for biometric appointments, and there is a large inventory to go through, it's going to take people some time to be able to book their appointment. So please disregard the time frame provided on the letter. You will be able to use that letter. You don't need another one. And I just want to comment at this time as well that goes for your passport request letter. There will be a time frame on your passport request letter. We recognize that it is going to take some time for the two-way courier to contact you for fees to be paid, for them to pick it up, especially if you're in a containment zone where the courier services are not available to pick up your passport. So please disregard the time frame provided. You don't need a new letter, and you will be able to use that to obtain those services.
Thank you, Jackie. I hope that was helpful for our audience. The next question is again with regard to biometrics. So, and this is also coming in our chat in the webinar right now a lot. So they're asking if they can go ahead and submit the biometrics from another country outside of India.
Yes, you can. You can submit your biometrics in any country. Why we're trying so hard here in India to open up as much as possible is so that we can restrict the movement of people. So we're not encouraging people to go to even other VACs where appointments are available in India. We're hoping that you will be able to be accommodated in your current location. So we certainly don't want to encourage you to travel to another country while we're trying to contain the spread during a pandemic. It is possible, but it is not encouraged. As well, once you complete your biometrics, you still have to come back to India, I would imagine, to, because there's going to be a certain period of time before your application will be decisioned. So in the meantime, you have to come back and still have that place where you would be requested to provide your passport. So we would just like for people to take that into consideration. I know everybody's extremely anxious and had plans to go to Canada, and this is a very disruptive time. It's a disruptive time for many, many people, and I can absolutely empathize with our clients. Please keep that in mind. We are doing our best to make sure that designated learning institutions continue to be able to offer classes online should students be able to continue their studies. And we know that not everyone will be able to get to Canada for their January enrollment, which again will be extremely disappointing for many. But we are working hard and to open up the VACs as much as possible, but we do need your help. We need you not to crowd in front of the VACs. We need you to wear your masks, to sanitize. The reality is, if we have cases within the VACs, we are going to have to close them. So it's very, very important that we keep our clients and our staff safe. So please make sure that you're using those precautions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. The next question is with regard to a death in the family or someone, a close family member suffering from a critical illness. So in a situation like this, if a family member needs to travel to Canada from India, under what kind of exemption should they apply for their visa?
So now it is a two-step process. So basically you have to receive approval from the Public Health Agency of Canada. And the reason for that is, say, for example, you have a tragic situation where your son or your daughter has passed away in Canada. Obviously, there might be a significant reason for you to be in Canada and to be there to assist with the funeral or last rites. And so in this process of applying for your exemption, they will also look at exemptions for you to leave the quarantine period of 14 days. So that's why it was implemented to first go to receive Public Health Association certificate to indicate why you must go to Canada. Okay, and then after you receive that certificate, you can write to the COVID exemption mailbox. In it, it's very important that you put in the subject line, PHAC approval. They are looking at those cases first to see whether or not you have approval. Then after that, what they will look at is, do you have a current visa and you're just waiting for the letter? If that is the case, they can provide you with the letter. The second thing they will look at is, do you have an application in process and what stage is it at? Depending on the severity of the situation and how close of a relative it is that has this situation in Canada, they will look at whether or not they can provide a biometric exemption or whether or not they can issue a foil-less visa. So it's all being centralized at our office in Canada, and it's very important that you follow those steps. I know in a time where you're dealing with tragedy and you're not thinking about paperwork, can be an extremely excruciating process. However, it's very needed in order to get the type of assistance that you will require once you go to Canada under in this unprecedented time and under, unfortunately, very tragic circumstances.
Thank you, Jackie. And we're nearly at the end of our time, but we'll take this one last question because I think this applies to a lot of applicants. So if someone has submitted their medicals quite a long time back, they have a valid visa, but the medicals seem to have expired. So can they travel to Canada if they are exempt as per the current travel restrictions?
You can travel to Canada if you have a valid visa. However, if your medical has expired, what we strongly recommend that you do is you redo your medical. The first and foremost is for your own safety. If you have something like tuberculosis or another communicable disease, it's very important in countries where that is have that you undergo a medical regularly. So we would strongly suggest that you book an appointment with your panel physician and indicate that you want an upfront medical exam. What you should do after that, because the information is sent to us via our online system, is do print off the fact that you've completed that medical and show it to the Canada Border Services Agency when you enter Canada. So even if it is not linked to your current application, what would happen at the port of entry is they would then only be able to restrict your visit under the terms that you have to undergo a medical examination within 6 months of entry into Canada. So if you want to make sure that your study permit or your work permit is valid for the full duration of time, make sure that you have your valid medical, or at least completed your medical if it has expired before traveling to Canada.
Thank you so very much for answering these questions, Jackie. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. So I would leave it to you, Jackie, to close this up and share any other additional information to our audience if you want to.
Thank you, Anandita. What I would like to say is we are trying to provide as much information as possible to clients. And I know that there has been a huge need within the student population, but we also want to provide other webinars to, because we recognize that a lot of things have changed over the last 9 months. And so if you have constructive feedback, if you have issues that you would like handled, please do write to us on social media and indicate what type of information you are looking for, whether or not that's a webinar on work permits, express entry, more information on student permits. I know a lot of people are going to say, just process our applications. I understand that. A lot of the processing we had to relocate to Canada. So we really feel that with our limited staff here at the mission, what we can offer to people is to provide them with information on what is happening so that it fills that void for them when they're thinking of going to Canada, when they have an application in process, so that you're aware of what is happening. So please feel free to comment on our social media or write to us on social media and provide us with that constructive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us in our webinar today. I can still see people typing in their questions in the chat box, and we have addressed quite a lot of the questions because quite a lot of the questions seem to be with regard to biometric submissions and expired COPRs. And we will also make sure that we update information on our social media pages based on the queries that you have sent to us on the chat box today. And as Jackie mentioned, please continue sending your queries to us. And based on that, we put together our list of frequently asked questions, and we also put together our messages on social media. So we would love to hear from you. Have a good day, all of you, and please stay safe and take care. And do look out for our next webinar for updated information. Thank you so much.